strategy in line with the country aspiration to achieve net zero GHG reduction as early as 2050. So it can be before 2050 or after 2050. And different organizations would have different type of commitment or target with regards to their greenhouse gas emissions, which is Khazanah has set a target to achieve net zero emission by 2050 and will be working towards carbon neutral operation by 2023. And this is also applied similarly by Petronas, aspire to achieve net zero carbon by 2050, similar to Tenaga Nasional. But for EPF, commit to achieve a climate neutral portfolio by 2050. And for FGV, they have two target, which is to halve its greenhouse gas emission by 2030 and achieve net zero emission by no later than 2050. Differently, for Axiata, they commit to achieve net zero emission no later than 2050, and they have specific commitment to reduce their operational carbon emission by 45% from a 2020 baseline by the year 2030. So different organization would have different how they make announcement with regards to their greenhouse gas or carbon target. And there is no specific standard or no specific terminology or standard with regards to whether net zero carbon target or carbon neutral. But IPCC distinguished several terms which is as follow. So there is net zero carbon, net zero CO2 or carbon neutral, which is for this commitment, the organization will only focus on carbon dioxide, which is balancing between the organization emission and removal, while the net zero GHG emissions, a net zero GHG or climate neutral is basically the commitment that includes all greenhouse gases, which is the one that I have mentioned earlier. So it includes not only CO2, but nitrous oxide, methane, and hydrofluorocarbon as well, which is they will balance between the greenhouse gas emission and removal of the greenhouse gas emission by the organization. So what determine the organization whether net zero carbon or net zero GHG emission is basically based on their operation itself. For example, certain organization, their main contributor or their main greenhouse gas emission is not CO2, but maybe for example like a fertilizer manufacturing company, their main greenhouse gas emission will be nitrous oxide. So that is why maybe they came out with the commitment to become net zero GHG emission or net zero GHG. So I would like to share an overview how our organization or organization conduct their greenhouse gas emission assessment, because this will be different between a product carbon footprint or product GHG emission assessment with national as well as individual. So basically, in terms of measurement, the greenhouse gas emissions, in terms of personnel, it is actually a personal carbon footprint. It's a carbon dioxide emission caused by each person clothing, food, housing, and traffic of daily life. While for product, it is actually measure the greenhouse gas emission over the entire life of a product, means that from the raw material extraction, manufacturing, transportation of the product, and delivering of the product to your customer. So that will be the boundary of the product carbon footprint. So for organization, it is actually organizational carbon footprint that measure the greenhouse gas emission from all activities across the organization, including energy use in building, industrial processes, and even your company vehicles. In terms of cities, it is a greenhouse gas inventory that estimate emissions and removal of greenhouse gases from given sources or sink from a defined boundary, means based on specific city area or zone between or that lies in the city. And in terms of country, national greenhouse gas inventory is estimation of emission and removal of greenhouse gases from given sources or sink from a defined country in a specific period. And for your information, Malaysia frequently submit our country report to United Nations. So there is a national communication that being submitted every 4 years and biennial update report that being submitted to United Nations for every 2 years. And currently, Malaysia is preparing or finalizing our fourth national communication and target to be submitted to United Nations by end of this year. So basically, how to calculate the greenhouse gas emissions, there are 5 steps that will be involved. So it will start with identifying the sources of emissions. So definitely, it will be a specific sources to your organization according to your nature of business and operation, and select the calculation approach, collect activity data, select emission factor, because we have to know the greenhouse gas emission was derived based on estimation. So we need a conversion from the data to the CO2 emission. So this is what we call as emission factor. Then we will start to do the calculation. And with regards to the guideline and methodology, there is a specific methodology to do to conduct the greenhouse gas inventory or entity accounting, which is we call that as a corporate standard scope 1, scope 2, which is published by the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And they also produce a specific guideline for corporate value chain accounting and reporting standard. So this is the guideline that will inform you how to start the calculation, how to do the screening, which one of greenhouse gas emission that will be relevant to your company, and combining with the other guidelines, which is basically how to do the calculation, which is a 2006 IPCC guideline, US EPA GHG inventory guidance, and for certain industry, for example, like a cement industry, they will apply GCCA guidelines. This is basically in order for them to do the calculation. So generally, there are basic type of data that necessarily required to calculate the emissions. So for greenhouse gas emission, we will require activity data, multiply with emission factor, and multiply with the global warming potential. So for methane, we need to multiply with 28 times compared to CO2. So what will be the example of activity data? For example, kilowatt hour of electricity being used by your organization, and we need to multiply with a grid emission factor, which is times CO2 per megawatt hour, or kilogram CO2 per kilowatt hour. From that, how we convert from our kilowatt hour consumption to the greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, then in order for us to do the greenhouse gas emission assessment, it will involve identifying which activity that release the greenhouse gas emissions. And we will need to categorize the emission into scope of greenhouse gas emissions. As mentioned, the guideline by GHG protocol, they divide the scope of emission according to scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. And we will do the calculation emission from activity which fall into each scope that relevant to your organization. So what is scope 1, scope 2, scope 3? So basically, scope 1 is the direct emissions which is that happen directly from the company facilities, company owned vehicles. So it will it will create a direct emission. And there is also scope 2, which is indirect, which is based on your purchased electricity, steam, heating and cooling for your own use. And there is also scope 3 emission, which is indirect, which is from your value chain. So it can be from purchased goods and services, your capital good, fuel and energy related activities, transportation and distribution, waste generated in operations, your business travel, whether uh, for using flight or using road transport, employee commuting from their house to the office, and a lease asset. And downstream, it will be transportation and distribution of your product, processing of sold product, use of sold product, end of life treatment of sold product, which is also due to waste generation, lease asset, franchises, as well as investment that has been done by your organization. So for scope 3, it will consist from upstream as well as from your downstream activities. So typically, the scope 1 and scope 2 emission from your supplier or your vendors will be your scope 3 emissions. So, in summary, scope 1 emission are direct emission from own or control sources, means that you able to control the operation, and definitely you able to control the emission sources. Scope 2, emission that are indirect emission from the consumption of purchased energy, and scope 3 emission are all indirect emission that occur in your value chain. Okay, with regards to the greenhouse mitigation and target, so what is GHG management? GHG management is about taking steps to measure and manage your greenhouse gas emission within your organization and extend the reduction of emission across your supply chain. And basically, the greenhouse gas management includes starting from a measurement. You have to measure your emission, followed by reduce, and followed by offset. So in terms of measurement, it will be your greenhouse gas inventory or greenhouse gas accounting, which is based on the previous slide. We need to know how to set your organization boundary, operational boundary, and you have know how to do the calculation. And mitigation through reducing emission and increase the carbon storage, where you need to identify the mitigation strategy that relevant to reduce your emissions, and analyze and prioritize area with high emission, identify abatement measures which contribute to emission reduction according to its economic performance and time frame. And after reduction has been conducted in your company, then you can go for offset, carbon offset for the residual emissions. So the remaining emission can be offset. A variety to offset method are used, for example, forest conservation, tree planting, and offset through a carbon credit, as well as renewable energy project. There is also certain company that straight away go to offset approach, which is they straight away start to do, for example, tree planting initiative. But the good practice is for you to reduce the emission within your organization, then the residual emission can be offset through the following initiative. So reduce what you can, offset what you can't. All right. In terms of greenhouse gas mitigation for a company, there is 6 elements need to be considered, which is for the first one, you have to prioritize the emission hotspot for reduction effort. That is why you need to start with measurement and inventory of your greenhouse gas emissions. Otherwise, you'll not be able to determine uh, what is your emission sources and emission hotspot. Then to set a carbon reduction target to demonstrate its commitment, the carbon reduction target can be whether absolute or intensity target. So there is a company that come up with their reduction target based on absolute number, which is ton CO2, uh, ton CO2 or ton greenhouse gas emission. But there is a certain company, for example, power utility company, their reduction will be based on intensity, for example, ton CO2 per megawatt hour. Or there is also company that set their target based on revenue. To decide the boundary of the target, as a minimum, the target should be set for scope 1 and scope 3 emission, but also exploring to include scope 3 emissions. But also depend on the intended use or commitment that you would like to have for the carbon emission target. If you're going for science-based target initiative, your target should include scope 3 emission target as well. But if you're not going for SBTI, you can only focus putting or establish the scope 1 and scope 2 emission target. To plan for a series of carbon reduction programs, as mentioned, a good principle is for you to reduce your emission internally and to establish enabling strategy for greenhouse gas reduction, for example, incentive, procurement practice, for example, green procurement, awareness and capacity building. Because to do the greenhouse gas emission assessment and to reduce the emissions, you need cooperation from everyone in your organization, and to integrate climate change adaptation strategies in designing mitigation strategies, because the mitigation and adaptation is overlapping between each other. So we need to integrate the adaptation and mitigation strategies. So this is basically a main source to reduce, example, how to reduce your greenhouse gas emission. We can start with your stationary combustion, mobile combustion, as well as waste. So they are basically greenhouse gas management hierarchy, which is starting from most favorite or options to least favorite option, which is start from avoid, reduce, substitute, sequester, or offset, where you need to avoid, if you're able to avoid activities that cause emissions, the greenhouse gas emission. In terms of reduce, change activity to reduce your emission. For example, change or adopt something that reduce your energy consumption, which lead to reduction of greenhouse gas emission. Change sources to reduce emission, which is change your energy consumption or fuel consumption that will generate less emission or zero emissions. Undertake activities to store your emission. This can be done through carbon capture and storage. There is a certain organization that capture their CO2 emission into algae. Then finally, you can offset residual emissions. Energy management is a key in reducing the greenhouse gas emission from stationary combustion. So it can be applied through energy management hierarchy, which is use less energy, which include any behavior that result in the use less energy. For example, using daylight through window rather than turning on the lights. Energy efficiency, which is involved the use of technology that require less energy to perform the same unit, to perform the same function. You can also switch to carbon-free renewable energy technologies such as solar, wind, biomass, geothermal, and hydro. And lastly, alternative for fossil fuel consumption. For mobile combustion, we need to avoid, shift, and improve approach to support sustainable low carbon transport. Example for avoid, which is for example, like non-trip incentive, road user fee or toll, car sharing program, that is one of the common example that being adopted by organization. Avoid freight empty loads, which is being commonly applied by logistic company. And there is also option to shift to more efficient modes of transport by using the public transport, by having a public transport improvement, parking management, transit-oriented development improvement in non-motorized transport and freight rail. You can also improve efficiency of remaining driving activity, which is active driving management, eco driving behavior, which is also a common approach being adopted by a logistic company, and fleet maintenance scheme, which improve your fuel efficiency, intelligent transportation system, transport signal synchronization, energy efficient vehicle or truck or ships, lower carbon fuel by using biofuel, which is in Malaysia, we have a B10, aerodynamic vehicle design, which also will contribute to the emission reduction for your mobile combustion. Okay, in terms of waste, there is also waste management hierarchy, which is you start with avoid or reduce. Reduce the total waste created within your organization. For example, use less material in design and manufacture, keeping product for longer period of time, and you can also think before buy. In terms of reuse, reuse material as many times as possible. Recycle waste into a new product, which also includes composting if it's meet quality and requirement. Recover energy from waste, for example, including anaerobic digestion, incineration, energy recovery, gasification and pyrolysis, which produce energy. And also recover material from waste. Finally, the end result, which is disposed, where remaining of your waste will be sent to landfill. Okay, these are basically several policies and programs conducted by our government that related to greenhouse gas mitigation, basically for your reference. And in terms of energy, there is a national energy policy and action plan, which has been launched this year. And under Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources, there is a new RE target, which is target 31% RE capacity in our generation mix and 40% RE capacity by the year 2035. So by having more RE in our generation mix, definitely will reduce our grid emission factor, and also indirectly will give better impact towards your scope 2 emissions. Under green building and infrastructure construction, there is a national construction policy, green building rating tools such as GBI, Green RE, MICRES, and so on. And there is also zero energy building assessment tool, building energy index labeling for 300 government buildings, CIDB, where they have conducted inventory of embodied carbon on the construction materials. So in terms of waste, KPKT is targeting waste to energy plants towards 2025, increase recycling rate towards zero single use of plastic and circular economy roadmap for plastic. Under transportation sector, there is a national transport policy and low carbon mobility blueprint, which these two documents focus on energy efficient vehicle mode shift, as well as adoptions of electric vehicle. With regards to the climate change and greenhouse gas emission, which is under jurisdiction of CASA, and we are Minister is currently update the NDC, have updated our Malaysia and National Determined Contribution, and currently preparing National Guidance Voluntary Carbon on Market Mechanism, and review of National Climate Change Policy, and also preparing the National Determined Contribution Roadmap, and also review together with MGTC, we are currently review the Green Technology Master Plan, and CASA also preparing the Malaysia Long-Term Low Emission Development Strategy. And under MGTC, we have My Hijau Mark and Directory, and Government Green Procurement, which is this to green the use of product and services. Green Technology Financing Scheme, which is there is a green bonds and sukuk, and green investment tax allowance and green income tax exemption. So this is basically the overall program that offered by NGTC that related to greenhouse gas mitigation for company reference, starting from GTFS, My Hijau, Digitality, and we also provide the green advisory and capacity building, green promotion investment through IGEM and National Energy Award. And we also, for city, we conduct the low carbon city program. And for energy, we have energy management certificate and energy management gold standard. And for low carbon mobility, we have charge EV, which is to increase the electric vehicle adoption in Malaysia. So we also have a low carbon mobility blueprint. Okay, as mentioned, there is a certain company that set their net zero target or carbon neutral target. So what drives them to set the greenhouse gas emission target? This include minimizing and managing the greenhouse gas risk, which sometimes the risk is due to their stakeholder. For example, to meet the requirement of their investor and from insurance company, achieve cost saving and stimulate innovation, preparing for future regulation, demonstrate leadership and corporate responsibility, and participate in a voluntary program as well. So this is basically the general step that involve in order for a company to set their greenhouse gas emission target. It will start from obtaining senior management commitment. This is important in order to ensure your greenhouse gas emission target will be successful. And decide on the target type, whether it is based on absolute or intensity target. Decide on the target boundary, which is based on type of cases. Boundary can be also based on your company geographical location. For example, for Petronas, when they have decided for their greenhouse gas emission target, their target is based on Malaysian operation only. Choose the target base year. For Malaysia, for example, is based on 2005. There is a certain company set target in base year, which is 2019 or 2022. What determine or factor that influence the choosing of the target base year is based on the completeness and the confidence of your data and your greenhouse gas emission assessment. Define target completion date, which is whether short-term target. Certain company have announced short-term target 2020, 2025, 2030, and long-term target, which is 2050. Define length of the target commitment period. decide on the use of offset or credits. Again, based on the intended use, certain commitment did not allow for offset or credits. Means that, for example, for SBTI, they only accept removal. So you cannot use your residual by using offset or carbon credit. Establish a target double counting policy. This is actually to avoid double counting, be it double counting in your scope or double counting within and between the entity within your company. Decide the target level, and definitely you have to track and report your achievement or your target progress. And it is also a good practice for you to revise your target as well. So basically, this will be my last presentation. So hopefully I have enlightened you with some information with regards to the climate change, greenhouse gas emission assessment, and the greenhouse gas emission target.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks very much, Saza.
Mm-hmm.
Just a few things I noticed from your slide.
Mm-hmm.
One is that I think there could be some GHG emission reductions from work from home arrangements. Would that be right? And do you have any way to estimate how much GHG emissions can be reduced from that?
All
Let's
right.
say,
All right. Thank you, Alex. For that, we need to establish a baseline emission. So means that what will be the total emissions for 5 days working at the office. So this is basically working at home is something that we have applied before MCO. So we have come up with several scenario and simulation. What will be the good number of days that's suitable for working at home? So you need to estimate how much the emission for every staff that commute and commute from their home to the office and from the office to their home. So the approach can be done if you don't have this information. This can be done through survey, because we always see that this information not being captured by any organization. So what we recommend, you can start doing a survey, which is the survey consists of distance traveled by each staff, mode of the transportation that being used by each staff, and then what will be their fuel consumption. So from that, you can decide in terms of number of days for them to work from their home. And based on that, you can know how much the reduction.
I see. Say
Mm-hmm.
for a bank with national branches, do you have any kind of perhaps just an average or maybe just a guideline how much can be saved from a work from home arrangement?
I don't have the specific number, but for our organization that has adopted this approach before MCO, it reduced our emission more than 10%
I
from our
see.
total organization emissions.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
because employee commute to office is our second largest contributor of greenhouse gas emission after the energy consumption.
okay. Well,
Mm.
perhaps you could advise the banks, perhaps even M-Bank, to perhaps allocate a lot more work from home days in a week. Yeah, for this sort of
Mm,
thing.
mm,
Yeah, after all,
mm,
we are trying to save the planet, aren't we? Yeah. Okay.
mm.
The other thing I just want to ask, among all the sectors that you have been advising or you've been overseeing, which do you think are the most ESG compliant, or would you say is a champion to reduce GHG emissions?
Basically, Alex, it's not fair for us to say any organization that is a champion for ESG. This is because based on their intended use. There is a certain company that conduct the ESG because of there is a pressure from their investor or pressure from insurance company, and there is also a company that need to do or to implement ESG because of their operation in other country. Because at this moment in Malaysia, we don't establish any specific regulation that related to greenhouse gas emissions, that related to ESG. But again, this is based on intended use of their ESG report or disclosure, certain because of the FTSE4Good index, or maybe for certain for their, again, as mentioned, is due to meet a requirement by investor or their stakeholder. So I don't have a specific name of the company, but basically, currently, company that receive a lot of pressure to do something, to adopt ESG, to do something that reduce their emission is definitely in power sector as well as oil and gas sector.
I see. Okay. On a 5-star rating system, right? Out of 5 stars, which would you? What sort of what companies would you say would be in a 5-star category based on
Five
your
star.
evaluation so far?
Again, different company would have different agenda regards to their greenhouse gas emission assessment and setting up, in fact, up to setting up their emission target. So I don't have a specific answer to that. But again, the one that we commonly see is those company that in the energy industry and oil and gas industry. And there is also quite recently we see from the operators like water utility company. There is also highway operators that also go towards that direction.
Okay, great. Thanks, Asaza. I think I would like to open the floor now to all the participants here. We have more than 30 participants now. To any questions that you may want to raise, just raise your hand and we can just let us know if you have any questions.
Yeah.
Okay, this is normally Malaysia. Normally, there's very few questions. Okay, maybe I would like to move into the carbon pricing mechanisms that was mooted by quite a number of government officials. I think even by CASA itself over the last early part of this year. Could I, perhaps could you give us a bit of guide on what kind of carbon pricing initiatives that will be introduced by the government? What kind of price are we going to set if, let's say, there is such a mechanism were to take place?
Okay, to let you know, first of all, there is two approaches for the carbon reduction that typically being implemented by any government, which is first based on the carbon tax or emission trading scheme. So with regards to that options, the ministry is currently analyzing for both options. In fact, they are conducting stakeholder engagement with regards to Malaysia domestic emission trading scheme, so that they are in the process of getting inputs from the stakeholder, the private sector, what would be the ideal establishment for Malaysia domestic emission trading scheme. And then with regards to the, you also aware that Bursa is currently preparing the Malaysia voluntary carbon market, where between organization, they can do the carbon reduction transaction, which is you can either being a buyer or a seller of emission reduction to offset emission by respective organization.
Okay. Okay. Currently, do you know any company in Malaysia who is coming up with their own internal pricing mechanism, so that they can actually evaluate how much they are actually able to generate carbon credits?
Okay, for information, internal carbon price is actually a shadow carbon price in order for the company not only to get involved with the carbon credit, but also become one of the approach for decision making approach. Means that what will be which mitigation option that is viable to be conducted for their company. So that is how they call as a internal carbon price. Yeah, to my knowledge, example of the company that have established their internal carbon price is Petronas. TMB, although they yet establish the internal carbon price, but they have started conducting a study. What will be the ideal internal carbon price for TNB?
Okay.
Mm-mm.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah. All right. Okay. This one. Thanks so much for your answers. And
Mm-hmm.
I would like to open the floor again for any more questions.
And it is okay if you don't have the question right now. Maybe the greenhouse gas emission assessment is yet become your interest or your priority within your organization. But you can have my email and contact number. So if you require for any assistance or clarification, feel free to contact MGTC.
That's wonderful. Salza.
Yeah,
Is
Shaida?
it possible to
Shaida?
share the slides that you have shown us today?
Yeah, I already shared with Alex, so you can get
Thank you very
that.
much.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, if I could just have one question for Puan Zazalina.
Yeah,
Hi,
sure.
I'm Isma from EPF. Just a very quick question.
Mhm.
Talking about the carbon market pricing, do you think that what's your thoughts on Malaysia first introducing voluntary carbon market as opposed to having the compliance carbon market mechanism in first? Do you think that it would work to have the voluntary carbon market first be introduced without the compliance carbon market mechanism being implemented first? What's your views on that? Thank you.
Okay. This is basically my personal response towards your questions. Whether Malaysia have our domestic compliance market or to have voluntary, it can be any options. It's good to have voluntary carbon market because it become a demand right now. Although we don't have a clear directive from the government, but for certain organization, the carbon reduction or carbon credit is one of the requirement for them to be used by them internally. For example, there is certain organization that need to reduce because of they have operation in other country that set a cap or that set how much their emission. So this can be used by that organization that also create a demand for our voluntary carbon market as well. And there is also there is a lot of potential of the seller of the carbon reduction. We do have a lot of renewable energy producer in Malaysia, which potentially can become the seller of the carbon credit as well, because it is quite difficult from our experience. We do have a carbon market mechanism, which is we have a clean development mechanism previously, which is it is a compliance market set by United Framework on climate change. But there is a lot of issues, challenges, and reduction of demand will give impacts toward the CDM. So by having our own voluntary carbon market, it will create a window and opportunity to the seller of the carbon reductions. Because we have a lot of existing CDM project and we have existing renewable energies producer, which potentially can be the seller of the carbon credit. All right, I hope I answered.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any more questions?
Okay. Okay. I think that is all the questions we had for today. And again, I'd like to thank Puan Saza. Really, she's been very open and very transparent with the presentation and her answers. As much as possible, she's trying to answer the questions because you know the current political situation is such that things are moving so much, right? That perhaps the ground rules are also changing. But this is just the first of a series of webinars that we are planning, and later on, Puan Saza may actually do one in which how do we actually evaluate the GHG emissions, right? And how do we actually calculate your GHG emissions that are actually coming off or going up instead? Yeah. So I think these are some of the series that we are planning to go into next year. All right. As perhaps there's a bit more clarity on the political front as well on that. Yeah. So
by that time.
So thanks everyone for joining. And if you have any questions, you can email me. All right. And I'll forward the questions over to Puan Saza.
Yeah.
Would that be all right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Happy to have that.
Thanks everyone. We'll see you all again for the next round.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, Puan Saza.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.